The Human Monster, The Depravity of Joseph Fritzl and the Murderers of Junko Furuta. Real monsters exist, and they wear human faces. They walk among us, cloaked in normalcy, their sickness hidden until it erupts in acts so vile they defy comprehension. The cases of Josef Fritzl and the murderers of Junko Furuta stand as stark testaments to the depths of human depravity, proof that the most horrifying evils are not born of fiction, but of flesh and blood. These atrocities force us to confront unbearable questions. How does a human become a monster? What twisted alchemy of mind and circumstance breeds such cruelty? And what does it mean to call someone a human monster when their actions seem to strip away all traces of humanity? The unthinkable crimes. In 1984, Josef Fritzl, a 49-year-old Austrian engineer, lured his 18-year-old daughter Elisabeth into the basement of their family home in Amstetten. What followed was not a single act of violence, but a 24-year campaign of unimaginable horror. Fritzl had spent years constructing a soundproof dungeon beneath his house, a concrete prison with a 660-pound steel door. There, he held Elisabeth captive, raping her thousands of times over 2 decades. She bore 7 of his children, 3 of whom grew up in the cellar with her, never seeing sunlight, while Fritzl raised the others upstairs with his wife, Rosemarie, who claimed ignorance. He maintained this double life with chilling precision, deceiving neighbors, authorities, and even his family. Elisabeth endured starvation, beatings, and psychological torment, her existence reduced to a living nightmare until her escape in 2008, when one of her children fell critically ill, and Fritzl was forced to seek medical help. He was arrested, convicted in 2009, and sentenced to life in prison, but the scars on Elisabeth and her children, physical, emotional, and psychological, will never fully heal. Across the world in Japan, another horror unfolded in 1988. Junko Furuta, a 17-year-old high school student, was abducted by 4 teenage boys led by Hiroshi Miyano, a low-level Yakuza wannabe. For 44 days, she was held captive in a suburban Tokyo home, subjected to relentless torture. The boys raped her over 500 times, beat her with golf clubs, burned her with cigarettes and lighters, and mutilated her body with scissors and fireworks. They starved her, forced her to eat cockroaches, and urinated on her. At least 100 people reportedly knew of her captivity, yet none intervened. Junko begged for death, but her captors refused, prolonging her agony until her body succumbed on January 4, 1989. They encased her remains in a concrete-filled drum and dumped it in a vacant lot. The perpetrators were convicted, but their sentences, ranging from 4 to 20 years, sparked outrage for their leniency, a final insult to Junko's memory, the sickness within. What drives a human to commit such acts? Fritzl and Junko's killers were not born monsters. They were shaped by a toxic confluence of psychology, environment, and choice. Fritzl's pathology hints at a narcissistic sadism rooted in control. Born in 1935, he grew up in Nazi-era Austria, raised by an abusive mother he later described as domineering. He had a prior conviction for rape in 1967, yet faced minimal consequences, emboldening his sense of impunity. Psychologists who examined him noted a need for absolute power, evident in his meticulous planning of Elisabeth's imprisonment. He didn't just act on impulse. He engineered a world where he was God, reducing his daughter to an object for his gratification. His ability to compartmentalize, playing the doting father upstairs while torturing Elisabeth below, reveals a chilling detachment, a hallmark of psychopathy. The boys who tortured Junko Furuta, Hiroshi Miyano, Nobuharu Minato, Yasushi Watanabe, and Joe Ogura were younger, aged 16 to 18, but their cruelty was no less calculated. Their backgrounds point to neglect, dysfunctional families, and exposure to violence, common among juvenile delinquents. Miyano, the ringleader, was obsessed with projecting dominance, his Yakuza ties feeding a warped sense of entitlement. The group's dynamic amplified their depravity, a phenomenon psychologists call groupthink or de-individuation, where collective cruelty overrides individual morality. They egged each other on, each act of torture escalating their need to outdo the last. Yet their youth doesn't absolve them. It underscores the terrifying speed with which moral decay can take hold when empathy is absent. Both cases reveal a shared thread, the dehumanization of the victim. Fritzl saw Elizabeth not as his daughter, but as a possession, stripped of agency. Junko's captors reduced her to a plaything, her suffering a perverse entertainment. This objectification is the cornerstone of their monstrosity, a deliberate erasure of the victim's humanity to justify their actions. But where does this capacity originate? Are such monsters born, or are they made? Becoming a monster. No one is born evil, but the seeds of monstrosity lie in all of us, dormant until nurtured by circumstance. Neuroscience points to abnormalities in brain regions like the amygdala and prefrontal cortex, which regulate empathy and impulse control in individuals with psychopathic traits. Fritzl's calculated sadism and the boy's gleeful cruelty suggest such deficits, but biology alone isn't destiny. Environment plays a crucible role. Fritzl's abusive upbringing and the societal leniency toward his earlier crimes likely reinforced his God complex. The boy's exposure to violence, coupled with Japan's hierarchical culture that discouraged intervention, created a perfect storm for their unchecked sadism. Yet biology and environment don't fully explain the leap to such extremes. At some point, these individuals chose to indulge their darkest impulses. Fritzl could have sought help. The boys could have stopped. They didn't. This agency is what makes their actions so monstrous. It's not just the act, but the conscious decision to revel in another's suffering. Philosopher Hannah Arendt's concept of the banality of evil applies here. Their evil wasn't supernatural, but mundanely human, rooted in selfishness, cowardice, and a refusal to confront their own moral rot. The meaning of a human monster. To call Fritzl or Junko's killers human monsters is to grapple with a paradox. They are human, biologically, psychologically, socially, yet their actions feel alien, as if they've forsaken the qualities that define humanity: empathy, conscience, connection. The term monster risks distancing them, painting them as outliers when, in truth, their evil is a grotesque exaggeration of human flaws. We all have the capacity for cruelty, however small. What separates us from them is the choice to reject it. These cases also expose the complicity of systems. Fritzl's dungeon went unnoticed despite social workers visiting his home. Junko's captivity was an open secret, ignored by dozens. Society's indifference, whether through bureaucratic failures or cultural norms that prioritize silence, enabled these horrors. The human monster doesn't act alone. They thrive in the cracks of our collective negligence. What it means for us. The stories of Elizabeth Fritzl and Junko Furuta are not just cautionary tales, but urgent warnings. Real monsters exist, and they are not the stuff of folklore, but of human failing. They remind us that evil is not abstract. It's personal, deliberate, and often hidden in plain sight. To prevent such horrors, we must confront the conditions that breed them. Unchecked power, societal apathy, and the normalization of smaller cruelties that pave the way for greater ones. As humans, we are capable of profound good and unspeakable evil. The line between the two is thinner than we'd like to admit, guarded only by our choices and the vigilance of those around us. Fritzl and Junko's killers crossed that line, becoming something less than human yet all too real. Their legacy is a challenge, to recognize the potential for monstrosity in ourselves and others, and to fight it with every ounce of our humanity. By Scott Young, aka Sinfamous Gamer. If you or someone you know is affected by abuse or trauma, resources like RAIN, 1-800-656-HOPE, or local crisis lines can provide support.